The Chakras, by Charles Webster Leadbeater. Chapter 1. The Anatomy and Visual Characteristics of the Etheric Force Centers. The appellation chakra derives from the Sanskrit tongue and denotes a wheel. It is employed in manifold derivative and symbolic acceptations, precisely as is its English counterpart. For, as we allude to the wheel of fate, so does the Buddhist invoke the wheel of life and death, designating the initial momentous sermon wherein the Lord Buddha expounded his doctrine as the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, a title which Professor Rhys Davids poetically construes as the setting in motion of the royal chariot wheel of a universal empire of truth and righteousness. This exegesis communicates the essence of the phrase as comprehended by the Buddhist devotee, notwithstanding that the literal translation of the terminology is simply the turning of the wheel of the law. The specific utilization of the term chakra to which attention is presently directed concerns its application to a series of wheel-like vortices situated upon the surface of the human etheric double. As this subject may be presented to readers uninitiated in theosophical nomenclature, it is apposite to introduce a preliminary elucidation. In commonplace discourse, a man may make reference to his soul as though the corporeal form through which he articulates were the veritable man, and the soul a mere possession or appendage, akin to a captive balloon floating aloft and tenuously attached to him. This constitutes a fallacious misconception, for the truth stands at the precise antipodes. Man is a soul who possesses a body, indeed a plurality of bodies, since, in addition to the visible vehicle through which he interacts with the material realm, he possesses others imperceptible to ordinary vision, through which he operates within the emotional and mental spheres. These, however, do not constitute the immediate focus of our inquiry. Within the preceding century, substantial advancement has been achieved regarding knowledge of the physical body's minutiae. Students of medicine are now conversant with its extraordinary complexities and, at the very least, broadly comprehend the operations of its intricate mechanism. Nevertheless, their investigations have been restricted to that portion of the anatomy sufficiently dense to be discerned by the ocular organ, and the majority remain oblivious to the existence of another category of matter, still physical yet invisible, designated in theosophy as etheric. This unperceived segment of the physical constitution is of paramount importance, for through it course the streams of vitality that sustain life. Furthermore, without its function as a bridge to transmit undulations of thought and emotion from the astral plane to dense physical matter, the ego could utilize none of his cerebral cells. To the clairvoyant observer, it manifests as a faintly luminous violet-gray nebulosity permeating the denser physical frame and extending marginally beyond it. The physical vessel is subject to perpetual mutation, necessitating constant replenishment from three distinct sources: aliment for digestion, atmosphere for respiration, and vitality in three modes for absorption. This vitality is fundamentally a force, although, when invested in matter, it presents itself as if it were a refined chemical element. It exists upon every plane, yet our immediate concern lies with its manifestation in the physical world, a study which demands some cognizance of the constitution and arrangement of the etheric body. I have discoursed upon this subject long ago across several volumes, and Colonel A. E. Powell has more recently collated the published intelligence, presenting it in a convenient treatise entitled The Etheric Double. The chakras, or force centers, are points at which energy transits from one vehicle of man to another. To an individual possessing some measure of clairvoyance, they are distinctly visible within the etheric double, wherein they appear as saucer-shaped depressions or vortices upon its surface. In the undeveloped man, they manifest as diminutive circles approximately 2 inches in diameter, glowing faintly. However, when awakened, they transform into blazing whirlpools of radiant light, vastly enlarged and resembling miniature suns. They are frequently cited as corresponding to specific physical organs, although in reality, they are situated upon the surface of the etheric double, which projects slightly beyond the dense corporeal form. One may visualize them as blossoms of the convolvulus variety, viewed from above, with their stems originating from points along the spinal column, such that the spine forms a central stalk from which flowers emerge at intervals, their bells dilating at the surface of the etheric body. The 7 principal centers are delineated in the illustration, with their English and Sanskrit appellations provided in Table I. These wheels are in a state of constant rotation, and into each one flows a force from the superior realm, an outpouring of the life stream emanating from the second aspect of the solar logos, designated the primary force. This force is 7-fold in nature, and all its forms operate through each center, although in every instance one predominates. Absent this influx of energy, the physical body could not endure. Thus, the centers are active within every human being, although in the undeveloped individual they typically revolve sluggishly, forming nothing more than the requisite vortex for the inflowing force. In a more advanced individual, they glow with pulsating luminescence, transmitting far greater currents of energy, thereby unlocking novel faculties and potentialities. The configuration of the vortices. This divine energy, which pours into each center from without, generates secondary forces at right angles to itself in undulatory circular motion, precisely as a bar magnet thrust into an induction coil produces an electric current that circulates around the coil at right angles to the axis or trajectory of the magnet. The primary force itself, having penetrated the vortex, radiates from it again at right angles, yet in rectilinear paths, as though the center of the vortex were the hub of a wheel, and the radiations of the primary force its spokes. By means of these spokes, the force appears to bind the astral and etheric bodies together as though with grappling hooks. The quantity of these spokes varies among the different force centers and determines the number of waves or petals which each of them exhibits. Consequently, these centers have frequently been poetically described in Oriental texts as resembling flowers. Each of the secondary forces sweeping around the saucer-like depression possesses its own characteristic wavelength, much like light of a specific hue. However, rather than traveling in a rectilinear fashion as light does, it moves along relatively large undulations of various magnitudes, each of which constitutes some multiple of the smaller wavelengths contained within it. The number of undulations is determined by the count of spokes in the wheel, and the secondary force interweaves itself beneath and above the radiating currents of the primary force, much as basketwork might be woven around the spokes of a carriage wheel. The wavelengths are infinitesimal, and it is probable that thousands of them are comprised within a single undulation. As the forces rush around within the vortex, these oscillations of differing magnitudes, intersecting one another in this basketwork manner, produce the flower-like configuration to which I have alluded. It bears, perhaps, an even closer resemblance to the appearance of certain saucers or shallow vases of wavy iridescent glass, such as those manufactured in Venice. All of these undulations or petals possess that shimmering Pavonine effect, akin to mother-of-pearl, yet each typically retains its own predominant coloration, as shall be observed from our illustrations. This nacreous silvery aspect is likened in Sanskrit treatises to the gleam of moonlight upon water. The illustrations. These illustrations of ours depict the chakras as perceived by clairvoyant vision in a moderately evolved and intelligent individual who has already brought them to some extent into functional order. Naturally, our pigments are not sufficiently luminous, no terrestrial colors could be, but the drawings will, at the very least, convey some conception of the actual appearance of these wheels of light. It will be comprehended from that which has already been articulated that the centers vary in magnitude and brilliance among different individuals, and that even within the same person, certain of them may be significantly more developed than the remainder. These illustrations are rendered approximately life-size, with the exception of the Sahasrara, or crown chakra, which it was deemed necessary to magnify to elucidate its astonishing wealth of intricacy. In the instance of an individual who demonstrates exceptional proficiency in the qualities manifesting through a specific locus, that center will appear not only significantly augmented but also particularly radiant, emitting resplendent golden beams. An exemplar of this phenomenon may be observed in Madame Blavatsky's precipitation of the aura of Mr. Stainton Moses, which is currently preserved within a cabinet in the archives of the Society at Udyar. It is replicated, albeit quite imperfectly, on page 364 of Volume 1 of Colonel Olcott's old diary leaves. These chakras fall naturally into three distinct classifications: the lower, the middle, and the higher. They might be designated respectively as the physiological, the personal, and the spiritual. The first and second chakras, possessing a paucity of spokes or petals, are primarily occupied with the reception of two forces entering the body at that physical level, one being the serpent fire from the earth, and the other the vitality derived from the sun. The centers of the middle category, numbered 3, 4, and 5, are engaged with the forces permeating man through his personality. Through the lower astral in the case of center 3, the higher astral in center 4, and from the lower mental plane in center 5. All these centers appear to nourish specific ganglia within the corporeal frame. Centers 6 and 7 stand distinct from the remainder, being associated with the pituitary body and the pineal gland respectively, and becoming operative only subsequent to the attainment of a certain degree of spiritual evolution. It has been posited that each of the distinct petals of these four centers symbolizes a moral quality, and that the cultivation of said attribute initiates the activity of the center. By way of illustration, in the Dhyana Hindu Upanishad, the petals of the heart chakra are correlated with devotion, lethargy, ire, benevolence, and analogous traits. I have not as yet encountered any evidence to definitively corroborate this hypothesis, and it is difficult to ascertain precisely how such a mechanism would function, for the manifestation is generated by certain readily recognizable forces, and the petals in any particular center are either active or quiescent, contingent upon whether these forces have or have not been aroused. Furthermore, their unfoldment appears to possess no more immediate relation to morality than does the hypertrophy of the biceps. I have certainly encountered individuals in whom certain centers were in full activity, notwithstanding that their moral progression was in no wise exceptionally exalted, whereas in other persons of high spirituality and the noblest possible morality, the centers were scarcely yet vitalized at all. Thus, there does not appear to be any requisite correlation between the two developments. There are, however, certain observable phenomena which may constitute the foundation of this somewhat peculiar notion. Although the resemblance to petals is caused by the identical forces circulating cyclically around the center, undulating alternately over and under the various spokes, those spokes differ in constitution, because the inrushing energy is fractionated into its component parts or qualities. Consequently, each spoke radiates a specialized influence of its own, even though the variations remain subtle. The secondary force in traversing each spoke is modified to a degree by its influence, and therefore undergoes a slight alteration in hue. Certain of these nuances of color may indicate a form of the force which is conducive to the development of a specific moral quality, and when that attribute is fortified, its corresponding oscillation will become more accentuated. Thus, the intensification or attenuation of the tint might be interpreted to signify the possession of a greater or lesser degree of that attribute. The root chakra, the first center, the basic, situated at the base of the spine, possesses a primary force which radiates outward in four spokes, and therefore configures its undulations to create the impression of being segmented into quadrants, alternately red and orange in hue, with hollows interspersed between them. This imparts the appearance of being inscribed with the sign of the cross, and for that reason, the cross is frequently utilized to symbolize this center, and occasionally a flaming cross is employed to denote the serpent fire resident therein. When operating with vigor, this chakra exhibits a fiery orange-red pigmentation, corresponding closely with the type of vitality transmitted downward to it from the splenic center. Indeed, it may be observed that in the case of every one of the chakras, an analogous correspondence with the color of its vitality is visible. The spleen chakra, the second center, the splenic, located at the spleen, is dedicated to the specialization, subdivision, and dispersion of the vitality derived from the sun. That vitality emanates outward from it in 6 horizontal streams, the 7th variety being absorbed into the hub of the wheel. This center, therefore, possesses 6 petals or undulations, all of varied hues, and is exceptionally radiant, glowing, and resembling the sun. Each of the 6 divisions of the wheel displays predominantly the color of one of the constituent forms of the vital force: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. The navel chakra, the third center, the umbilical at the navel or solar plexus, receives a primary force with 10 radiations. Thus, it oscillates in such a manner as to segment itself into 10 undulations or petals. It is intimately associated with feelings and emotions of diverse kinds. Its predominant hue is a peculiar amalgamation of several shades of red, although there is also a substantial presence of green within it. The divisions are alternately chiefly red and chiefly green. The heart chakra, the fourth center, the cardiac, situated at the heart, is of a resplendent golden hue, and each of its quadrants is subdivided into 3 sections, yielding 12 undulations, because its primary force generates for it 12 spokes. The throat chakra, the 5th center, the laryngeal, situated at the throat, possesses 16 spokes, and therefore 16 ostensible divisions. There is a significant quantity of blue present, yet its general effect is argent and gleaming, evocative of moonlight upon undulating waters. Blue and green predominate alternately in its sections. The brow chakra, the 6th center, the frontal, located between the eyebrows, presents the appearance of being divided into halves, one chiefly roseate, though interspersed with a great deal of yellow, and the other predominantly a type of violet blue, again strictly concordant with the hues of the special types of vitality that vivify it. Perhaps it is for this reason that this center is cited in Indian texts as possessing only 2 petals, though if we are to calculate undulations of an analogous character to those of the preceding centers, we shall ascertain that each hemisphere is subdivided into 48 of these, aggregating to 96 in all, because its primary force possesses that number of radiations. This abrupt escalation from 16 to 96 spokes, And again, the even more startling disparity from 96 to 972 between this and the subsequent chakra demonstrates that we are now concerned with centers of a categorically distinct order from those which we have hitherto contemplated. We are not yet cognizant of all the factors governing the quantity of spokes in a chakra, but it is manifestly evident that they signify nuances of variation in the primary force. Before we can articulate much more than this, a multitude of observations and comparisons must be conducted, rigorously repeated and verified repeatedly. But in the interim, this proposition remains lucid, that while the requirements of the personality can be satiated by a finite number of force types, when we approach the higher and permanent principles of man, we confront a complexity, a multiplicity, which necessitates for its expression a vastly superior selection of modulations of the energy. The crown chakra, the seventh center, the coronal, situated at the apex of the cranium, is, when aroused into full efficacy, the most resplendent of all, replete with ineffable chromatic phenomena and oscillating with nigh inconceivable velocity. It appears to encompass a vast array of prismatic hues. However, in its totality, it remains predominantly violet. In Indian treatises, it is characterized as thousand-petaled, and indeed this description is not far removed from veracity, as the aggregate of radiations of its primary force within the exterior circle is precisely 960. Every constituent line thereof is faithfully reproduced in our frontispiece, although it is scarcely feasible to adequately convey the luminous effect of the individual petals. Furthermore, it possesses a unique attribute absent in the other chakras, a subsidiary central vortex of resplendent white, flushed with gold at its core, a minor activity exhibiting 12 distinct undulations of its own. Typically, this chakra is the final center to be awakened. Initially, its dimensions are commensurate with the others. Yet, as the individual advances upon the path of spiritual progression, it steadily expands until it encompasses nearly the entire vertex of the cranium. A further peculiarity accompanies its evolution. Initially, it manifests as a depression within the etheric body, akin to the others, for through it as through them the divine force enters from without. However, when the individual realizes his status as a sovereign of the divine light, dispensing largesse to all surrounding him, this chakra inverts itself, turning, as it were, inside out. It ceases to be a channel of reception and becomes one of radiation, transforming from a depression into a prominence, projecting from the head as a dome, a veritable crown of glory. In Oriental iconography and statuary depicting deities or exalted personages, this prominence is frequently portrayed. It is visible upon the head of a statue of the Lord Buddha at Borobudur in Java. This constitutes the conventional method of its representation, and in this form, it is discovered upon the heads of thousands of images of the Lord Buddha throughout the Eastern world. In numerous instances, one may observe that the two tiers of the Sahasrara chakra are depicted, primarily the larger dome of 960 petals, and subsequently the smaller dome of 12 ascending from it. The head situated on the right is that of Brahma from the Hakudo of Todaiji, at Nara in Japan. It will be observed that the statue bears a headdress fashioned to represent this chakra, although in a form somewhat divergent from the former, displaying a coronet of flames erupting therefrom. It appears also within Christian symbology, specifically in the crowns worn by the 24 elders who perpetually cast them down before the throne of God. In the highly evolved individual, this coronal chakra effused splendor and glory, fashioning for him a veritable crown. The significance of that scriptural passage is that all he has acquired, all the magnificent karma he creates, and all the wondrous spiritual force he generates, he casts perpetually at the feet of the logos to be utilized in his work. Thus, repeatedly, he may continue to cast down his golden crown, for it continually reforms as the force wells up from within him. Other accounts of the centers. These 7 force centers are frequently delineated in Sanskrit literature, notably in certain minor Upanishads, the Puranas, and Tantric works. They are utilized contemporaneously by numerous Indian yogis. An associate acquainted with the esoteric life of India assures me that he is cognizant of a specific school in that country which makes liberal use of the chakras, a school comprising approximately 16,000 pupils dispersed over a vast area. There exists a wealth of compelling information regarding this subject derived from Hindu sources, which we shall endeavor to summarize, accompanied by commentary, in a subsequent chapter. It appears, furthermore, that certain European mystics were acquainted with the chakras. Evidence of this is found in a volume entitled Practical Theosophy by the renowned German mystic Johann Georg Gichtel, a pupil of Jacob Boehme, who likely belonged to the secret society of the Rosy Cross. It is from this work of Gichtel's that our Plate 3 is reproduced, by the gracious permission of the publishers. This tome was originally issued in the year 1696, although in the edition of 1736, it is stated that the illustrations, of which the volume is primarily a description, were printed only some 10 years subsequent to the death of the author, which occurred in 1710. This book must be distinguished from a collection of Gichtel's correspondence published under the identical title, Practical Theosophy. The present volume is not composed in the form of epistolary exchanges but consists of 6 chapters addressing the subject of that mystic regeneration which constituted such a significant tenet of the Rosy Cross. The illustration presented herein has been photographed from the French translation of Practical Theosophy, published in 1897 in the Rosy Cross Library by the Chacornac Library, Paris. Gichtel, who was born in 1638 at Ratisbon in Bavaria, studied theology and law, practicing as an advocate. However, subsequently becoming conscious of a spiritual realm within, he renounced all mundane interests and established a mystical Christian movement. Being opposed to the ignorant orthodoxy of his era, he incurred the animosity of those he had challenged. Consequently, circa 1670, he was banished and his property confiscated. He ultimately found refuge in Holland, where he resided for the remaining 40 years of his life. He evidently regarded the figures printed in his Practical Theosophy as being of a secret nature. Apparently, they were retained within the exclusive circle of his disciples for a considerable number of years. They were, he asserts, the result of an inner illumination, presumably of what, in our modern times, we would designate as clairvoyant faculties. On the title page of his book, he states that it is a concise exposition of the 3 principles of the 3 worlds in man, represented in distinct illustrations demonstrating how and where they possess their respective centers within the inner man, according to that which the author has discovered within himself in divine contemplation, and that which he has felt, tasted, and perceived. Like most mystics of his day, however, Gichtel lacks the exactitude that should characterize true occultism and mysticism. In his description of the figures, he permits himself lengthy, though often quite engaging digressions regarding the difficulties and problems of the spiritual life. As an exposition of his illustrations, however, his book is not a success. Perhaps he dared not articulate too much, or he may have wished to induce his readers to learn to perceive for themselves that of which he was writing. It seems probable that, through the truly spiritual life he led, he had developed sufficient clairvoyance to perceive these chakras, yet remained unaware of their true character and function. Thus, in his attempts to explain their significance, he ascribed to them the prevailing symbolism of the mystic school to which he adhered. He is here addressing, as will be observed, the natural earthly man in a state of darkness. Thus, do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.